Hi, so I wanted to make a time lapse to record my entire process of creating this final piece for my project. I wanted to explain, the tools I used, how I used them and stuff. So, the tools I used were the brush tool, the transform tool, which I did with Control plus T, the pan tool, which I used to move around the canvas with space, the zoom tool, which was used with the scroll wheel, which I again used to move around the canvas. So the canvas is like the area I'm drawing on. The brushes I used using the brush tool were the pencil brush for sketching, the basic opacity brush for some of the shading, the basic brush for the coloring, the blender blur brush for some more of the shading, and then for more of the shading I used some different layer types. So I used a normal layer, I used a multiplier layer, and a lighten layer. So I also used some filters during this process to make the shading look different. So I used a posterize filter at like a 7th level. So that creates kind of a color banding effect that I really like. I think it fits quite well with my spooky aesthetic. I used Critter, so the program I'm using is Critter because I'm very familiar with it. I use it quite a lot for drawing in my own spare time. I'm using Audacity to record this audio right now. I used OBS to record the time lapse, and I'm going to use CapCut to edit the video altogether when it's done. So I had a really strong vision going into this, and I think I achieved it. So now I'm going to explain what's happening in the time lapse. So to start off with, I took multiple screenshots from multiple different angles using the SketchUp browser version, and I just kind of took some screenshots to try and get a nice, thing to work on, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to work on with this. I knew the angle I wanted, I just needed to get it right. And then once I'd done that, I let out some guidelines so I could kind of sketch out some quick ideas of what I wanted to do. I played around with some ideas which didn't end up really going with, but I wanted to have my character from my plan holding a torch and looking over at the coffin and the graffiti and stuff in the corner. So I tried to do some stuff with the anatomy for a bit, and I struggled with that for quite a while. For like half an hour I struggled with the anatomy and stuff. So I ended up getting an image off of Google Images of a person holding a flashlight in the pose I wanted. And then I got the background off of them and I drew over them on a new layer. And then I edited that as well to make it, again, more to what I wanted using the transform tool. And then I drew more sketches over that. It's a lot of, sketching and fixing stuff, and more sketching and more fixing stuff. So, yeah, so you can see I struggled with the hand for quite a while, which is, it's whatever. I get it okay in the end. And then it starts to look better once I add the hair, and it starts to look more like what I wanted it to look like. So I was really struggling with the legs, so I zoomed the character in to be closer to the front of the screen, I guess. And that also got rid of the legs. And then I tried to figure out where the flashlight was going to go, how the graffiti was going to look. So it was more of just kind of planning how everything was going to look. So I wanted the graffiti to go behind the desk and the stack of papers, so I had to use a polygonal lasso tool to kind of crop that out. And then I went in and I did some more sketching over it. This was more of a clean sketch, though, because I didn't feel like I needed to do full line art for this, but I also wanted it to be, not a messy sketch. So I went and I tried to do some clothing things, which didn't really work out too well. And you see that I really struggled with this hand for quite a while because I wasn't entirely sure how to get it to look right. But eventually I think I do get it to look better than it did before. So the mood board was very useful because it allowed me to kind of visualize my plan in my head, because I included, so many references, especially from a horror podcast that I listened to that really inspired this, final part of the project in general. There's a lot of writing from the horror podcast, transcripts from it, in the mood board, as well as some of the official art from there. There's, one piece of official art from there, but it's something, it shows the colors I want to do. There's also, planning out on there, which I did, which was really helpful in the long run because it meant I was able to, instead of worrying about how am I going to do this, I had an idea because I'd already planned that out on the mood board. Okay, so eventually I get the hand down and I get the flashlight down and I just do a bit more adjusting, and then I'm like, cool, this is great. And at that point, I start to go in on the shading once I've finished with the arm. So I start to go in with the shading, and I, again, cut out the desk, but this time I copy it as a new layer so we can just go over so I don't have to keep masking the brush that I'm using to paint in the thing. So I'm using a lot of layer opacity stuff here, and a lot of different layer modes like the multiply and the lighten, like I said earlier, and that's to create this kind of dark effect that I can then erase from using the erase. Well, each brush has like a erasing mode, so I used that on each of the things. So you can use, I'm using the opacity soft brush, and then I'm going in on a lighten layer using the opacity soft brush with a very bright green to make the eyes graffiti really glow, to make it very spooky and creepy, which is the kind of the thing I wanted to go. And then I had to get rid of the SketchUp watermark because that was still in my screenshot and I didn't want that to be there. I realized I didn't have to do too much with that because you're not really going to be paying attention to that corner. Maybe you are now. I don't know. And then I went in with the color. So I went in and I used a full brush, or whatever I said earlier it was called. And I went in and I filled it all in. So I filled in, the belt, the shirt. And I feel like it does come together a lot more once I added the color. And then I removed the background thing that was behind the character, just to make it more immersive again. And I just messed around with the layer settings for a while, and trying to get the shading to all look good. And I, did a bunch of shading stuff, trying to get the lighting to make sense, because I wanted a bit of light to be coming in from the windows, but not too much light. And I also wanted a majority of the light to be coming from the flashlight that the character's holding. And then I went and cleared up the lines a bit, and I also cleared up the color a bit just to make it look better. And then I did more of that shading stuff, and you can see there's a little window that pops up, and that's the posterization effect. And that basically adds a lot of the color banding that I really like for the aesthetic. And then again, I just go in and do a bit more shading, and I do a bit more shading after the time lapse as well, and that's the finished image. I hope you enjoyed.